There is grandeur in this view of life.
Welcome to Evolution Talk with Rick Coast, an introduction to the oldest story ever told.
Quite a few episodes back, I produced a show that looked at a new hominin species discovered in 2013. This history-changing discovery happened when paleoanthropologist Lee Berger, assisted by cavers Rick Hunter and Steve Tucker, explored the Rising Star Cave in the Cradle of Humankind, South Africa. Now, I won't go into detail of this discovery here, but I will link to that earlier episode in the show notes. If you haven't listened yet, I'm sure you will enjoy it. On it, I'm joined by Stephanie Keep, who at the time worked for the National Center of Science and Education. It's been a few years since the release of that episode, so I thought it's about time we revisited that earlier hominin species. Think of it as an update on what science has to say about them now. And before I do, I'll let Professor Berger give us a brief overview of where we were back when the species was discovered. This is taken from a National Geographic video produced shortly after the find.
We would name a new species Homo naledi. Homo naledi was an incredible creature. A brain the size of an orange, primitive characters and advanced characters, teeth that are remarkable in being a little bit human-like and then primitive in so many other ways, things we'd never seen before. We would eventually find 15 individuals, 1,574 fossils.
I'm calling this episode Homo Naledi 2020. So settle back and enjoy. As Professor Berger stated, within the Naledi chamber in the Rising Star Cave system, over 1,500 bone specimens were found. Once researchers started to examine the pieces, they concluded that they belonged to 6 adults and 9 younger individuals. Bones included fragments of jaws, ribs, skulls, and various limbs. All were scattered about and preserved upon and within the cave's clay-rich floor. And there were mysteries. The first mystery was, how old were these bones? How long had they been hidden away from view? How many centuries had passed before Professor Berger's team squeezed through the tunnels of the cave system to find the Homo naledi bone fragments? The problem at first was that the bones weren't encased in sediment that could be dated. All they had were the bones themselves, so they had to get creative. They were able to date the sediment the specimens were surrounded in by using a uranium-thorium method. This gave them a minimum age of 236,000 years. The second method used was electron spin resonance dating, as well as the uranium-thorium dating. This is often used when radiocarbon dating is insufficient, and it's especially good with teeth. So they selected 3 teeth and waited for the results. They came back at a maximum age of 335,000 years. In 2017, the findings were published to everyone's amazement. Now, why was this so amazing? Because initial guesstimates were that the Homo naledi represented a species that had probably lived around 1 to 2 million years ago. That's because of the size of the Homo naledi brain. It's small, around the size of an orange. Small-brained hominins were thought to have died out long before modern humans came along. The only other smaller-brained hominin around at that time was the Homo floresiensis, and they lived in isolation on an island. But not the Homo naledi. Because of the dating, we now know, and incredibly so, that they lived at the same time modern humans did, as well as the Neanderthals. Whereas it was before thought that larger brains ruled when it came to surviving, that notion is turning out to be false. So what does this mean exactly? Their brains were only slightly larger than that of a chimpanzee. So why does the brain size throw a wrench into everything we thought we knew about hominin evolution? Well, 2 things are going on here. Thing number 1, there are many similarities in the anatomy of the Homo naledi to that of early species such as the Homo erectus. Now, that could mean that they sit near the base of the entire Homo family. If so, it also means that they were around for almost 2 million years and underwent very little change during that time. Their small brains were just fine from a survival perspective. Now, as I mentioned, it's not impossible when you consider the hobbit-like Homo floresiensis, but remember, they lived on an island and were isolated. The Homo naledi lived in Africa. The pressures placed on them to survive were far more significant. Now remember, I mentioned two things. So thing number two, they also might have evolved from a more modern ancestor. There are similarities to us. Their frontal lobe looks a lot like ours, and they have an asymmetrical brain, and this suggests a complex brain. Even the shape of their skulls have features like ours, but not all. Along with features that do mirror that of earlier Homo species, the curve at the back is like modern humans. All of this, the frontal lobe, the skull's curve, and the asymmetrical brain, indicate a more recent evolutionary path. If so, there are possibly other branches we know very little about and have yet to discover. There might be many more just lying right below the surface, ready to further illustrate exactly how illustrious our family tree is. So, what else have we learned? Well, quite a lot, actually. The size and shape of their teeth and the lower jaws suggest small muscles. This tells us that they probably existed on diets that didn't require a whole lot of chewing. Their teeth were pitted, which is probably because they came into contact with dirt when they ate. Now, why might that be? It's not because they ate dirt. It's because they most likely hunted for underground storage organs like tubers. We know, too, that they were bipedal and stood upright at about 5 feet tall. They also weighed no more than around 100 pounds, a little less. Their feet and ankles weren't that much different than ours either, but its hands were. Its hand bones are curved like those of much earlier Homo species. So you see, the Homo naledi represents a puzzle, a wonderful puzzle, but one which, if we ever complete it, might reveal a very unexpected picture. We might have to rethink everything we thought we knew about our own journey out of Africa and who we shared the planet with. You might also be wondering why, if we have bones, we haven't extracted DNA yet. Now, that would tell us a lot. Unfortunately, attempts to do so have failed. Even though the bones weren't completely fossilized, the DNA is degraded to the point of being unreadable. So far. The biggest question of all remains, how did they get there? The Naledi chamber is incredibly challenging to get to. One has to be of slight build and squeeze through crevices so small that they're certain to trigger bouts of claustrophobia. It's also dark, black even. The sun doesn't touch the darkness of the Rising Star cave system. So, why venture there at all? We have to be thankful they did from a research perspective. We wouldn't know of their existence otherwise. But why go there at all? Many researchers still believe that they did so to deposit their dead there, somewhere far away from predators. That could either be to protect the deceased from desecration or to protect themselves. Nothing attracts predators like the smell of decay and dead flesh. I know it's morbid, but it's a theory worth considering. They may have wanted to get the bodies far enough away from the existing group to avoid having to deal with what they might attract. But why so deep in the cave system? It couldn't have been an easy task, especially if the tunnels are preserved and haven't changed in the last 236,000 years. It's hard enough to navigate through it yourself, let alone drag a body with you. There's also no indication they used fire to light the way. This is usually accompanied by scorch marks on the cave walls, but there were none. Now, maybe there was a more accessible entrance. I mean, it has been a lot of years. Things might have changed, but who knows? Another theory is that the bodies were deposited there due to the flow of water. Perhaps they died above ground, and an ancient water system carried them to their final resting place in the cave. Now, that's not a bad theory, if not for the fact that there does not seem to be any signs that water ever made its way into the chamber. There's also no signs of trauma, so they were not attacked and killed there. And there's also nothing to suggest burial rituals. They were simply brought into the chamber, and that's it. Or that's all it appears to be. And all we can do is speculate. But there's more. In 2013, a second chamber was found, and also more remains. As Professor Berger explains,
perhaps they were using the rising star system in a very special way, perhaps deliberately disposing of their dead. The new chamber is almost identical to the original Naledi chamber, and we've called it the Naledi chamber. And inside of it, amongst other individuals, we've also found one of the most complete skeletons of a hominid ever discovered that we've called Neo.
The Naledi chamber, like the Naledi chamber, is 30 meters below ground and also involves a series of crawl spaces and narrow passages to squeeze through. The presence of the remains in the Naledi chamber supports the idea that they were placed there deliberately. With the discovery of the skeletal remains of the adult they've named Neo, we may find some answers, or even unearth more questions. Perhaps the Homo naledi were more prevalent than we thought. Might they have used tools as well? And could some of the tools we've found and attributed to modern humans, or even Homo erectus, have been made by Homo naledi? It could be all the above or none of the above. We simply don't know yet. But it's a wonderful time to be alive when discoveries like this are made. Juliette Brophy, an assistant professor at Louisiana State University, puts it into perspective in a recent TEDx talk.
Homo naledi has taught us that we need to reassess what it means to be in the genus Homo. We need to rethink what it means to be human. In fact, most of the characteristics that we use to define the genus Homo, such as brain size and hip morphology, are no longer valid. No other species exists with this mix of primitive and derived traits. But why is there so much morphological variation in the genus Homo? And what force is driving that variation?
What I find even more amazing is what the Homo naledi's existence causes us to question, especially things we thought we already knew.
Another implication for these fossils is that for the first time, we have concrete evidence of a species coexisting in Africa at 300,000 years with modern humans. Until this discovery, we only had modern humans, large-brain modern humans that existed in Africa. Did they interbreed with each other? Did they compete with each other?
Now, I can't wait to see what we learn next and what new discoveries await us. The next one could be right around the corner or directly beneath our feet. I hope you enjoyed today's episode of Evolution Talk. I'm Rick Host, and you can find show notes and source material for this episode at evolutiontalk.com. I hope your week is going well, and until next time, please take care of yourself.
Evolution Talk is a Rick Coast production.